I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. Big news out this week concerning currency, specifically the Russian ruble, and what better man to come on to talk about this than a former Assistant Treasury Secretary, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, who you have a PhD in economics, and I really appreciate you coming on to explain the dire nature, even though it's not in the mainstream media very much, like, well, the Russian ruble's under attack, who cares? It's falling, must be a bad country. This is more than just a simple currency crash, is it not?
Yes, it's not a currency crash in the sense that there's no economic reasons for the ruble's fall. Unlike the United States, which has a massive trade deficit and whose currency, if the currency markets were not rigged, would be collapsing, the Russian economy has a trade surplus, and therefore there's no pressure on its currency from economic conditions. Now, some people would say, well, the sanctions put pressure on it. But in fact, the sanctions seem to put more pressure on the European Union countries than on Russia, because the effect of the sanctions on Eastern European agriculture has been devastating. And the effect of the sanctions on German firms and industry has been very, very strong, very bad. And so the effect of the sanctions should be showing up in the euro and not on the ruble, and not so much on the ruble, more on the euro. So what we're seeing, though, is it's the Russian currency that is falling. So there are two explanations for this. I don't have any inside information at this time. And I also want to say that in the Treasury, I was in charge of United States domestic economic policy, not international policy. And since my time in the Treasury, there are new instruments, new ways of operating, and there are behavior patterns that are prominent that in my time would have been considered highly unethical, if not strictly illegal. So the way the system works today is quite different from the time that I was in the Treasury. Now, with that said, I can suggest with some confidence that there are two explanations for the ruble's fall. One is that the hedge funds, you have to remember that George Soros some years ago conducted a massive attack on the British pound. Yeah, and was able to prevail over the Bank of England, an American ally. So it could be that this is the behavior of hedge funds. Now, what they can do is they can short the ruble, just like the bullion banks short the gold. They come in with naked shorts, they dump all these contracts into COMEX, and it drives down the gold price. Dave Cranston and I have demonstrated this with the diagrams, the charts, the graphs, over and over and over. Well, the same thing can be done to any commodity, almost any commodity, and certainly to the Russian ruble. So you may have these large hedge funds deciding that they have the cover of this growing tension that Washington is producing with Russia to conduct an attack on the ruble, just as Soros had attacked the British pound. So this could be the explanation. This is the hedge funds maximizing their profits by causing discomfort to the Russians. On the other hand, it looks as if it's such a massive attack that it would have to be conducted by someone who does not have a profit and loss concern. In other words, the United States government. And so what we may be watching here is Why, the Federal Reserve now has a massive trading desk, just like Wall Street. Most people are unaware of this. This is a new sort of development where the central bank now can essentially dominate the trade in anything. So it could be the Federal Reserve acting as a representative of the State Department or the National Security Council or the White House is conducting an attack on the ruble. It could be the Treasury's Exchange Stabilization Fund. But whatever it is, it's something that doesn't have to worry about losing money if this doesn't work to their advantage in the sense of profit. It, of course, can work to their advantage in driving down the ruble and putting pressure on Russia. And that's, in my view, what is going on. This is not some independent action of market forces reacting to Russian trade deficit or a Russian recession or some such thing. And the sanctions, as I have said before, are not sufficient in the impact on Russia to produce this. So it's either hedge funds, currency speculators like Soros, or it's an act of war in behalf of the United States government conducted by the Federal Reserve or the Treasury's Exchange Stabilization Fund, or possibly some other entity about which we simply do not know. So what is the likely result? Well, so far what has happened is the foreign exchange markets have stopped trading in ruble because at least that's the latest information I have. And I'm not sitting here watching it every minute, but that is the information as of maybe an hour ago. They've stopped trading the ruble because the volatility is such that they don't know how to trade it. and so they're closing out people's positions. Well, this has stopped the decline, at least for now. What the next step is, I don't know.
Do you think that, so your bet is that it's not market forces, it's likely not hedge funds. You think it's U.S. government action crushing the ruble, or the Fed, or a combination of the government, the Fed, whatever?
No, I don't know whether it's the hedge funds or the government. Or possibly both. I mean, the hedge funds may be working with them. One thing that people are not aware of is that in the United States, in the last however long, probably since the repeal of Glass-Steagall, the end of the Clinton regime, the big banks, the big Wall Street money, are essentially agents of the government. And this is why they don't get prosecuted. This is why they can break all kinds of laws, commit felonies, and settle with a fine. Now, no one else can settle a felony charge by paying a money payment. But this is what we've been watching in the financial arena when these financial gangsters are caught. Instead of being indicted and put on trial, they pay money. It's kind of like what the aristocrats in the old days. They never appeared in the courtroom. They just paid off whoever it was.
They don't even use their money. They use shareholder money. I mean.
So this is not something that we can know for certain. All we can know for certain is it is not due to any inherent weakness inside the Russian economy. We've just signed massive oil deals with China, massive oil deals with Turkey, a NATO ally who appears to be deserting NATO for Russia, massive trade deals with India. Putin has just come back with $100 billion in trade deals. The Russian balance of payments is positive. There's nothing to explain this, just as there's nothing to explain why 3 o'clock in the morning 40 tons of paper gold are dumped into the COMEX in New York when no one's trading. So this is clearly a manipulation. I can't say that it's the hedge funds and Soros or that.
If it is the U.S. government,
both.
If it is the U.S. government,
other.
isn't this an act of
Or
war?
both.
I mean, the Russians are they're gonna institute some payback, are they not? Isn't this an act of war?
I don't know, because I don't know how.
But isn't this an
sturdy.
act of war if they're crushing their currency to the point where they stop trading it? Isn't this an act of war from the U.S., if it is the U.S.?
Greg, just take it easy. Of course, it's an act of war if the United States government is behind it. But what we don't know is it actually doing damage to Russia? What damage is it doing? If the Russian prices are in rubles, it's not clear what damage it is doing. So the ruble isn't the world reserve currency. Now, if it's causing foreign capital to leave Russia, that's a good thing, as far as I'm concerned. A country cannot be independent if it's dependent on foreign capital and the American dollar. And so it may well be that this policy is helpful to the Russians. I think the trouble that Russia is undergoing is that their economists are neoliberals, just like ours. And neoliberal economics is not only wrong, it is an ideology that covers up for American imperialism, American financial imperialism. So neoliberalism in economics is an ideology of American financial imperialism. And the trouble is that all the economists who study economics, that's what they learn. I mean, China's got these people too. And so both Russia and China are disadvantaged because their economists have Western training. And so they need to get rid of that. And they need to get rid of the idea, which is inherent in neoliberalism, that a country needs foreign investment in order to develop. You don't need it. The Russians can finance their own investment. They can print rubles just like we print dollars. They can get all the loans they want from China. The notion that they are somehow got to have access to Western capital, as long as the Russians think this, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. And they think that because they have these stupid neoliberal economists. So Putin should fire them all and get people who understand that Russia needs to develop internally without relying on foreigners who can manipulate their economic situation. In fact, if I was Putin, I wouldn't even allow the ruble to be freely traded. If you allow your currency to be traded, then of course the Americans, the hedge funds, they can come in and beat it up whenever they want. You know, the United States has done this repeatedly, over and over and over. You may remember the currency crisis some years ago in the Far East and Asia. This was all Wall Street doing, or American foreign policy doing, or some mixture. When you let your currency be traded, the world reserve currency can dwarf it, and therefore they can drive it in any direction they want. So for these countries to trust the United States with their currency, they're mad. They're absolutely insane. They should never do that. And this, of course, is a huge vulnerability for Russia, and it looks like China is on the verge of making its currency convertible freely, and it'll be subject to the same kinds of attacks. So basically, it comes down to the economic advice that the Russians and Chinese are getting is deplorable. It's dangerous to them. It's the most dangerous thing they're facing. It's far more dangerous than the sanctions.
Do you think that these Russian ruble, I guess call it a crisis or collapse or whatever, do you think this could spark a daisy chain of bond defaults and the Russians saying, hey, we're not going to pay you back or whatever? Do you think this could start a financial free fall starting in Europe because they're closely linked to Russia?
who knows? Nobody knows. No one knows all of the interrelationships between all the derivatives. I mean, it may well be the falling oil price is going to set off a derivative bomb, because there's got to be a jillion oil derivatives. And I'm sure when they were made, they didn't expect this collapse in the oil price. You have to understand the oil price has collapsed just like the ruble, only first. And the gold price has collapsed because it's driven down. I don't know exactly why the oil price has collapsed. I think the ruble has collapsed because it's under attack, not for real reasons. So who knows? But I think if the Russians wanted to if they want to do payback, it's very easy for them. All they need to do is the next time all of these contracts, these paper gold contracts, are dumped on the futures market, the Russians need to go and buy them all up and then demand delivery, because there's no gold to deliver, and the whole system would collapse. So the Russians can cause a gold squeeze here anytime they want. If they just go in, COMEX, every time the COMEX is hit with these massive dumping of uncovered, naked shorts, the Russians should buy them and then demand delivery. Let's see what happens. They blow the system wide open because they can't make delivery. The United States cannot make delivery. But they don't do that. They're not provocative. I saw just a while ago the foreign minister, Lavrov, said NATO is not Russia's enemy. Well, it most certainly is. It's involved in this attack, and they're not arguing. So, is this delusion, or is this just saying we're not going to take up this conflict? So it may well be the Russians are going to say we're not going to take up the conflict. We'll suffer whatever the consequences are, but they're going to be suffering too. And this way we can't be blamed. The Americans can't tell Germany it's our fault that the German economy collapses. Who knows? But it looks to me like the Russians are simply not going to do tit for tat. They're just going to let the Americans go on their way. And I see now it's just been announced that Obama is signing more sanctions later this week against Russia. Well, these sanctions are certain to hurt somebody.
You wrote another post about how we're on the brink of war and economic collapse. Would you like to kind of explain why you wrote about that and what that means? We're on the brink of war and economic collapse? I guess these sanctions may play into the economic collapse that could hurt other people than Russia, mainly the Europeans.
Well, I think that what you see with war is we've had both the House and the Senate pass resolutions. These are not laws, but these resolutions that passed the Senate unanimous, and the House vote was 411 for and 10 against. And these resolutions demonize Russia, define it as a great threat, and call on Obama to arm the Ukrainians so we can use the Ukrainians to fight Russia. In other words, we're going to fight Russia to the death.
Well, we just sent 100 tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles to Eastern Europe.
So, and the whole purpose of this, of course, is to, of course, the Ukraine can't fight Russia, is to have the Russians slap them down, and then we can go to the Europeans and say, see, the Russians invaded, look how dangerous they are, you're next, they'll be in Berlin tomorrow, they'll be in London by the end of the week, Paris will fall, Rome will burn. We can't wait to be able to tell the Europeans this, because the whole purpose of all of this is to completely break every kind of relationship, economic, political, cultural, between Russia and Europe. That's what Washington's goal is.
Got it.
That's what it's all about. including the tax on the ruble and the sanctions and all. So what the House and Senate have done have provided the foundation for this. Now, I think American people should be fearful because out of 535 people that they've elected to Congress, they only managed to elect 10 intelligents. The 10 who voted against it. The rest of them are bloody fools. They're setting up a war that nobody could win. For what reason? For American superiority. Well, you don't have any superiority if the world's awash in radioactive waste, there's nuclear winter, the climate's collapsed. I mean, the whole thing is an absurdity. So we have 10 intelligent people in the Congress. Well, that's not enough. So now the economic collapse. Look, we know something serious is wrong because what has happened is that the CEO of Citigroup, the big bank Citigroup, they control the Treasury, they control the Federal Reserve, the financial regulatory agencies, most of the previous Treasury Secretaries, including the current one, I believe, are Citigroup executives. So what have they done? Well, again, the United States Congress failed to get the budget together and pass the authorization. So we now have this massive omnibus appropriations bill, spending. Citigroup gets stuck into this spending bill. The repeal of the only provision in
Dodd-Frank.
What is it, the Dodd-Frank, that has any teeth. It is the provision that says if the big banks are going to be casinos and gamble on derivatives, they cannot do that in the depository institution where depositors have their accounts. They have to farm it out into subsidiaries. So if the subsidiary gets in trouble, the subsidiary has no access to depositors' money. This is the only real reform part of Dodd-Frank. Well, Citigroup got put into the omnibus appropriations bill the repeal of this so that they can gamble on derivatives and the taxpayers and the depositors are on the hook for the losses. Now, why would you do that except that you think you've got a lot of derivative trouble? It could easily be the oil derivatives.
So you're saying they legislated possibly the demise of America as we know it.
And Elizabeth Warren was the only person I know of that opposed it. She went to the Senate floor, she exposed it, she gave a biting denunciation, but I don't think she was able to block it. A United States senator is no match for one of the
there were 40
banks.
senators that voted no on it. About almost an even split, Democrats and Republicans. So, but still,
Yeah. Well, the rest
Democrats
of them are
and
owned
Republicans.
by the bank. That's where they get their campaign contributions. And this is really arrogant, and it shows such unbelievable power on the part of Citigroup that you would think it would scare the people in the Congress, and they would do something about it and bust up these banks. But instead, the banks gotten away with it. So my understanding is, yes, it passed. First of all, something like this does not belong in an appropriations bill. and it effectively overturns Dodd-Frank. And the only protection that depositors had gotten out of the reform legislation has now been taken away. And the banks now can gamble all they want, and they're covered by FDIC.
Less than $50 billion.
Which has no money. And so the bail-in provisions give them access to depositors' money. So this is sick, and it shows that the United States government is probably the most corrupt government on earth at this time. far, far more corrupt than Russia or China. So what we may be facing here is an amazing meltdown in the derivative sector.
You think that's a possible signal, though, that they put it in there because they're worried?
It's a pretty good signal. Yeah. Or else the guy just wanted to show, look, I'm more powerful than the president. It could just be ego. Maybe he just did it for ego. This was done essentially by the CEO of Citigroup. And maybe he just wanted to say, look how powerful I am. He's president. What can he do? He can't do anything. Well, look what I can do. So it could be ego. I can't say for sure that it's a sign that things are about to blow up. But it could be that. Or it could be ego. You know, these people who get in these kinds of positions have this power. They like everybody to know how damn powerful they are. And so this may be all it is. It may be the CEO of Citigroup showing that he's the most powerful man in America.
But beyond this, why did you think that we're on teetering on, you said war, and you discussed that, and then also teetering on economic collapse or war? Why teetering on economic collapse? You wrote this before they passed this.
Well, as we have discussed many times, the American economy, in fact, the entire Western economy, is a house of cards, and it's standing on the dollar. Now, normally the dollar would have tanked because look how many new dollars they created, but they didn't create goods and services to balance the dollars. So there should be the potential of massive inflation. Look at all the debt that's been created. If you look at the explosion in American debt, this should make any sort of debt instrument in the United States have a very low price, which would mean you would have very high interest rates. And yet we don't. And so why don't we? Because being the reserve currency and given all of the institutions that the U.S. has to manipulate and rig, they're able to rig a house of cards. So the house of cards is standing on a dollar, the value of which is rigged. It's not real. It should be the dollar that's collapsing, not the ruble. And yet it's the ruble and not the dollar. And that shows the power of the United States to rig markets. Well, how long can they rig these markets? When the sanctions drive Russia out of the dollar payment system, you know, they're in the process of creating their own clearing system so they don't have to use the SWIFT system. That could be another reason for the attack on the ruble. We're trying to stop that, or we're trying, you see, we see agreements being made between large countries like Russia, China, India. These are the three largest in terms of population on Earth. And now we know the Chinese economy, on a purchasing power parity basis, is actually now larger than the United States economy. So these are large economies, big countries that we cannot invade and occupy, making deals between themselves that do not use dollars. So you see a large percentage of the world leaving the dollar payment system. Well, how then can you keep rigging the value of the dollar if people are not demanding it and they're dropping its use? That means the supply is huge, but if the demand starts dropping, how do you keep the price propped up? So far, we're doing it because we have the European Central Bank inflating, and we have the Bank of Japan inflating dramatically. And so if all currencies are inflating, there's no reason for the United States to drop relative to the others because they're all. You see, but how long can you have all currencies inflating before it all hits the fan? And so, you know, it's a balancing act. You know, your juggler starts off with 3 balls, then he gets 4, then he gets 5, and 6, and 7. What happens when he gets 15 or 50? At some point, you drop the ball, and the whole thing falls down. And this seems unavoidable because the basis for the dollar is not real, it's rigged. The basis for the economy here is not real, it's rigged. And as I've already said, there's no reason for gold to drop mysteriously in the middle of the night. There's no reason for the ruble to take this type of tumble when the Russian economy is in good situation and they have a positive balance of payments. This is orchestration. This is rigged. Well, if we find out that the United States government can overcome all market forces by rigging, then we don't any longer need economics. There's no such thing as economics if governments can rig everything despite economic forces. And so what we're faced with, Greg, is this the case? Can the United States rig everything such that economic forces are suppressed forever? I doubt it. But if that's the case, it means we don't need economics or economists, because their explanations don't mean anything if the economic forces can be overcome by politically rigged markets. So that's why I say we face collapse. I personally don't think that the house of cards can stand.
You think the dollar's days are numbered? I mean, are we getting into some end game setups here with the unbelievable fraud and manipulation going on? Aren't we in the end game here?
I would think so. I would think we're.
You think the dollar's days are numbered?
The dollar's days are numbered. There's no economy. Look, they tell you have a recovery. What was it last week? The Federal Reserve released its survey. It went and surveyed what is the occupancy. How are the young living? What are the millennials doing? They found out that almost 50% of 25-year-old Americans are back home living with their parents. 50%, half. They found out that 30% of 30-year-olds are back home living with their parents. How can there be any jobs? These people either can't get jobs or they can't get jobs that pay enough that they can afford rent. There's no economy if you've got almost half, I think it's 47, 48% of 25-year-old young men and women forced to return home to their childhood rooms in order to have a roof over their head. And many of these are university graduates with large student loan debt. And then you've got 30% of 30-year-old people who should be, advanced in their careers, and they're back home with their parents living in their childhood room. Now, this is what the Federal Reserve has just released from its survey. Where is the housing market? These are the people who form households. They can't even afford rent. They have to go home and live with their parents. How can there be a housing market? Without a housing market, how is any construction? Do you see what I'm saying? It just goes on and on and on. There's no economy here. It's an illusion they created. They falsify the way they measure inflation to get rid of it. They falsify how they count unemployment. They don't count discouraged workers, so they come up with these ridiculously low unemployment rates where nobody can find a job. They come up with these GDP growth rates that make no sense in the sense because what's happening? Well, people's incomes aren't rising. How is the economy growing if people's incomes aren't rising? In fact, they're falling. So the whole thing is a big lie. It's a big illusion, a big lie, and it's all part of keeping this myth going. It's all part of keeping this house of cards standing. And so so they go pick on Russia and China when they essentially have a massive crisis here that they can cover up in every way because, first of all, the media never asks a question. It just regurgitates the press release from the government. The financial press never says, hey, wait a minute, how can this be? It's all good news, things better. The Wall Street economists, the Merrill Lynch economists, it's we're doing better, we're doing. It's just crazy.
You're saying and let me get this right and succinctly, you're saying if the economy is an illusion, you pointed out unemployment and kids living at home and the housing market and the GDP numbers, you're saying if the economy is an illusion, then I guess the value of the dollar is too?
Yeah. Well, it's this illusion of the economy is part of which keeps the dollar up. Because people say, oh, well, maybe they're printing too many dollars, or maybe they got too much debt. But look how good the economy is, so it must be safe there. So they don't yank their money out. They send more here. Oh, it's not safe in Europe. It's not safe in Japan. It's not. So it's part of the illusion. It causes the money, foreign money here to stay. New comes. Americans keep theirs here. So it's part of the matrix. I mean, if you saw that movie, The Matrix, where everyone lives in this artificial reality, that's what Americans live in. It's exactly identical. We live in a totally made-up world in which reality is totally different from what it is presented to be. We have a great economy. Look at all these jobs they keep reporting. If that's the case, how come 47, 48% of 25-year-olds are back home living with their parents? Why 30% of 30-year-olds back home living with their parents? It doesn't work. The lies are transparent, and yet nobody says, hey, wait a minute, how can this be? I see it. Me. I'm sure 3 or 4 others do as well, but you never see it in the financial press. The TV never explores this question. No debate comes up in Congress. And the Federal Reserve didn't say, how can this be? How can this be? It's the Bureau of Labor Statistics never wonders how all these jobs can be that they're reporting and everybody's back home living with their parents. It doesn't, it's an absurdity. Maybe, the matrix seemed to be stable until a few troublemakers got to working on it.
Well, I guess to them, to people who watch this, you're a hero. To them, I'm sure you're a troublemaker. But Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, I really appreciate the red pill interview and telling us what's really going on in the economy and with the ruble, the dollar, and what's going on globally. Really appreciate you coming on and enlightening us on USAWatchdog.com.
Well, I appreciate your interest, Greg, and always delighted.
And I know you live and die on donations, to help fund your site, because you don't have any advertising whatsoever. And I'll put a link to your donations page, and if people want to help you out and keep, you write a tremendous amount. You're a very prolific writer, and you write a tremendous amount of material every week on your website, paulcraigroberts.org. So thank you so much for coming on USA Watchdog.
You're welcome. Pleased to be with you.